Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Round 16, the Italian Grand Prix from Monza. The weekend was overshadowed by the news that Queen Elizabeth II of England had passed away. On Friday, before FP1, all the teams and drivers made their way to the pit lane, where we had a moment's silence to remember the British monarch. As a lot of the teams are based in England, and many of the team personnel are British, this was an incredibly personal moment for a lot of people in the F1 family. Many of the teams ran remembrance messages on their cars. The AlphaTauri had a very prominent message on their halo. I've done a bit of post-production work on this image to increase the clarity and remove some of the details behind Pierre Gasly. On Sunday, before the start of the race, there was a further minute silence. It was great to see how Formula One showed respect to the British monarch. The race was won by Max Verstappen, but the way the race finished overshadowed the result. On lap 47 of 53, Daniel Ricciardo's car stopped on the track. The drivers took that opportunity to stop for fresh tyres, knowing that there was going to be a safety car. It should have been fairly easy to have cleared his car, but it got stuck in third gear, which meant it was impossible for the marshals just to roll it off the track. As the laps ticked by and the cars slowly made their way around the track behind the safety car, you could feel the anger of the crowd growing. They were massively disappointed, as they were expecting a grandstand finish between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. And it's one of those races that has kind of left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. It just sort of shows that the safety car rules are currently a bit of a mess. The race organisers followed the race rules perfectly correctly, but they're just set up in a way that takes too much time out of the race. Formula One has three mechanisms to deal with incidents on track. The first is the virtual safety car. This is for incidents that can be resolved by the marshals. So a car that's stopped on the track that they can push off, or maybe there's a bit of debris on the track that they can just quickly go and pick up. The virtual safety car requires all the drivers to reduce their speed, but keep their existing positions. For incidents that require a lot of work before the race can resume, they have the opportunity to red flag or to stop the race immediately. In this situation, all the cars return to the pits, they can get new tyres, and they restart the race from a standing start on the grid. The safety car is for incidents that fit in between these two. Its primary purpose is to ensure the safety of the marshals and the drivers. The idea is that the cars get bunched up behind the safety car and they're going round the track at a reduced speed. The problem with it is that it takes a long time to establish the correct running order of the cars. Often you'll have slow cars between the leaders. These are cars that have been lapped, and it's important to get them out of the running order before the race restarts. This can take a number of laps to resolve, and it's incredibly frustrating for the fans because we're losing race time to what is effectively administration. Whatever solution Formula One come up with, I think they need to make sure that safety is paramount, but also we get a good spectacle as fans. Everyone wants to see the race finish under a green flag. Options that they could look at is not having a safety car in the last 10% of the race, and rather than consuming laps behind a safety car, they bring the cars back into the pits and wait for the incident to be resolved. This will make it a lot safer for the people working on the track, as well as the drivers. This also means that fans won't lose out on too many laps of racing. Anyway, there's a lot of work for Formula One to do. No one really wants to see a race finish like this again. Formula One has to make sure that it's safe, that it's entertaining, and that it's fair for the drivers. In this case, even though the entertainment wasn't great, the result was correct. Max was by far the fastest driver on the day, and had Charles overtaken him at the restart, we'd have been complaining about something else. So the whole thing was just a bit anticlimactic. Ferrari was celebrating their 75th year as a car manufacturer. They ran a special livery for this race. Have a look at this rear wing. It's absolutely gorgeous. I really hope that they kind of keep this for future designs because it's stunning. The drivers had special yellow race suits and matching helmets, and the whole Ferrari team were wearing yellow uniforms. It was also the 100th year that motor racing has been held at Monza. The Ferrari president was at the race. The president of Italy was in the Ferrari garage. The Tifosi, the Ferrari fans, were there in force. So there was no pressure on Ferrari at all. On Saturday, Charles didn't disappoint. He got his Ferrari onto pole position in a stunning lap. Here he is celebrating. He's just climbed out of his car. You can see he's wearing his yellow overalls, his yellow helmet. Max was second and Carlos was third, but both of those drivers are going to start further back in the grid due to engine penalties. On Sunday, Charles made a good start, even though he was challenged aggressively by George Russell going into the first corner. I shot the start from the Rettifilio, which is the first corner. It's a great spot to photograph, as this is probably where all the action is going to take place. It's an extreme braking zone at the end of a very long straight. At the start of the race, it's hard to believe that all the cars are going to make it around the corner, and somehow they do, mostly. After a few laps, Charles was leading, but Max was closing in on him slowly. When we had a virtual safety car for Vettel stopping on lap 12, Ferrari decided to bring Charles in for a pit stop. Charles is the only driver that stops at this point. It's very risky because it's so early on in the race. The reason they did it is they wanted to take an advantage of the virtual safety car. All the cars are driving around the track at a reduced speed, so a pit stop costs you less time under the virtual safety car than it would under normal race conditions. It could save you up to 20 seconds. Because the stop was so early, his second set of tyres didn't last the required 41 laps, which meant he had to come in for a second stop later. And him having to stop twice gave the race to Max, who only stopped once. When the strategists are planning a race, there's usually one option that stands out as being the fastest. Red Bull and Max can focus on that because they know they've got the fastest car on race day. And if another team copies them, it doesn't really matter because Red Bull will come out on top because of their superior race pace. Ferrari know this, and this is why they often try and do something a bit different. They're trying to find an alternative strategy that might work for them, because if they do exactly what Red Bull will do, they will come second. So it's better to try something risky in the hopes that it's going to come off. Unfortunately, risky doesn't always work, as we've seen during the course of this year. People have been racing cars at Monza for 100 years. The first race was in 1922. Since then, it's held every single Italian Grand Prix, except for in 1980, where the track was closed for refurbishment. It's located in a town called Monza to the northeast of Milan. It's in a beautiful forest, and it's the first purpose-built racetrack in all of Europe. It's gone through many changes. The most extreme was in 1955, where the track was turned into a high-speed oval with very steep banking. The old track is still there, and the modern track uses some of its old route. Monza is ultra-fast, but unlike Spa, there's very little undulation, and there's very few corners. Cars were clocking speeds of up to 340 kilometers an hour. That's 210 miles per hour. Being an older racetrack, we use corner names rather than numbers. The famous corners are the Rettifilo, the Curve Grande, the two Lesmos, the Ascari chicane, named after the first Ferrari winner of the Italian Grand Prix, and the Parabolica, which is the final corner. Being a mostly flat track, it does prove to be difficult for photography. Luckily, several towers have been provided where we can shoot from safely. I did get a cool shot of a near incident between Carlos Sainz and Valtteri Bottas. Bottas was on a flying lap, and Sainz was on a slow lap, and he appeared to not know that Bottas was behind him. He slowly drifted onto the racing line, and Bottas had to take rapid emergency action to avoid a collision. The driver of the weekend was undoubtedly Nick de Vries. Nick de Vries might be a bit of an unusual name for some of you. De Vries is a Dutch driver. He's a Formula 2 champion, and he's recently won Formula E. And he's won a host of karting titles. He's been on the edge of Formula 1, being involved with McLaren and most recently Mercedes as a reserve driver. But for whatever reason, he's just been at the wrong place at the wrong time and missed out on a drive. For example, last year he was in contention for the Williams seat, but he lost out to Alex Albon. On Friday, he was driving Sebastian Vettel's Aston Martin. Each team is required to give some time to young drivers in the practice sessions. He was expected just to do the one session for Aston Martin. Unfortunately, Alex Albon got appendicitis, and he couldn't race this weekend. Things actually got quite serious for Alex, because after his operation, he had to be put on a ventilator. But it looks like he's recovering well now. De Vries had to switch from Aston Martin to Williams on Saturday. This was his first ever Formula 1 qualifying session, and he managed to get his Williams, which is not a very fast car, into the second part of qualifying, eventually coming 13th overall. To put this in context, his teammate, who's been at the team for 3 years, was 16th. Because of grid penalties to other drivers, De Vries moves up to 8th place for the start. He's next to Max Verstappen, who's 7th, so we have an all-Dutch row. He drove beautifully and managed to finish 9th. At the end of the race, he struggled to get out of his car because his arms are so tired. As you can imagine, he doesn't have the upper body strength that a regular Formula 1 driver has. De Vries would love to be in Formula 1 next year, and he's taken this opportunity to show how good he could be. He now has 2 teams after him, Alpine and Williams, and this is probably another nail in Latifi's coffin because it doesn't look great when a reserve driver comes along and outperforms you so comprehensively. When De Vries was driving for Aston, he had the number 34. These numbers are given randomly to drivers who are testing. He raced using the number 45, which I believe is going to be his designated number. I also think this is the first time that a driver has raced for 2 different teams on the same weekend. If you know of any other case, please do let me know in the comments below. There were a lot of celebrities this weekend in the paddock. There was Sylvester Stallone, Hugh Grant, but I missed all of those because I was trying to get this shot. This is Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, and it's the Italian tricolour flying behind it. It's an iconic Monza shot, and it's probably the last chance to get this photograph, because earlier this year, Formula 1 banned flyovers at races. However, I think in this case, the Italian president managed to pull rank and override Formula 1. I did manage to photograph footballers Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Patrice Evra, as well as Gordon Ramsay and his daughter. I did manage to get this shot of Piero Ferrari the oldest surviving son of Enzo Ferrari, Flavio Briatore, the former Benetton team principal, and Prince Albert II of Monaco, all coming out of the FIA hospitality. Our interesting culinary treat of the weekend were these acai pots from Oak Bakery. They're really tasty and packed with superfruits. In my case, also chocolate and strawberry. George Russell had another incredibly strong weekend. He qualified 6th, but moved up to 2nd due to the grid penalties for other drivers. I got a couple of good shots of George. Here's one of him leaving his garage. It's a slow shutter speed with lots of movement. And here's a shot I took of him during the race. This is down at Rettifilo, the first corner. I've shot this quite low down, and I've really pushed the contrast. That, coupled with the bright light, makes it a very interesting photograph. But my best shot of George from the weekend is this one of him just after the race. I was standing behind his parents, and I got this lovely image of him coming towards them to celebrate his 3rd place. He joined Max on the podium, which was actually quite hostile. The home fans were really not happy with the result, and they weren't happy with the way the result was achieved. There was a lot of booing. To be fair on Max, he did handle the incredibly difficult situation very, very well. And he's not the first driver to be booed on the podium. Both Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel have been subjected to boos in recent times. But the Red Bull team were actually very respectful. There was no big celebration when Max climbed out of the car, and the team declined to have a team celebration photograph at the end of the race. The podium Monza is probably the best of the year. It's on a raised platform that sits partly over the pits and partly over the start-finish straight. After the race, fans descend onto the start-finish straight, so it's full of people. It's an amazing spectacle, but it's incredibly complex to photograph. I'd wanted to capture the drivers coming out of their cars, but from that point, it's very, very hard to get to a good vantage point for the podium. You kind of need to do one or the other. And I think definitely next year I'm going to focus on the podium. The way the race finished shouldn't distract from what an incredible drive Max put in. He's becoming quite unstoppable in Formula 1. He was only beaten to pole position by 0.14 of a second. Even in Formula 1 world, that's tiny. He was demoted to 7th place on the grid because of engine penalties. Quickly overtaking the cars in front of him, he got to 2nd place and was slowly catching Charles. But when Charles stopped on lap 12, the race was effectively over and Max had won 5 in a row. One of my favourite shots of Max this weekend was taken in qualifying. This is taken from the outside of the Parabolica corner. This is a high-speed corner at the end of the lap. It's a great spot to photograph cars because they're really on the edge. What doesn't come across in this photograph is the amount of mosquitoes that were at this corner. I was eaten alive. The first thing that's going in my camera bag for Singapore is bug spray. Thank you for watching my review of the Italian Grand Prix. I really hope you've enjoyed it. We've got a little bit of a break now before we go to Singapore. Originally, there was a slot for the Russian Grand Prix, but that's not happening. But don't worry, I've got loads of vlogs planned. There'll be a look back to the 2019 Singapore Grand Prix, which was controversially won by Sebastian Vettel in a Ferrari. I'll also start a vlog on Formula 1 School, covering all the topics you're too afraid to ask. So if there's anything that you don't know, please let me know in the comments below. Until the next one, goodbye.